At dawn on June 5, 1944, the most important military operation in modern history was not advancing. It was paused. Across southern England, more than 150,000 Allied soldiers were already sealed into history, even though the final order had not yet been given. They were confined to camps surrounded by barbed wire and military police. No one was allowed to leave. No one was allowed to talk. Letters were censored or confiscated entirely. Radios were locked away. Rumors filled the silence where information should have been. Ships sat fully loaded in harbors from Plymouth to Portsmouth. Tanks, trucks, ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, and men were already aboard. Some soldiers had been sleeping on steel decks for days. Others waited on shore, packed into staging areas, knowing only that the wait itself was part of the operation. Planes lined muddy airfields across England, their wings beaded with rain. Paratroopers lay beside their parachutes and weapons, boots on, helmets within reach. They had rehearsed this moment endlessly, yet now that it was close, time seemed to slow rather than accelerate. Everything was ready, everything except certainty. History often portrays D-Day as inevitable, the unstoppable turning point of World War II. But inevitability is a luxury of hindsight. On June 5, 1944, the invasion of Normandy was balanced on a knife's edge. Could still be postponed. Could still be cancelled. And if either happened, the consequences would reshape the war and the world that followed. Operation Overlord was not simply a battle plan. It was a massive logistical gamble involving more than a dozen nations, thousands of commanders, and millions of individual decisions. It required precise coordination between air, land, and sea forces on a scale never attempted before. Every element depended on timing measured not in days, but in minutes. The beaches of Normandy had been chosen after years of study. Tide levels had to be low enough to expose German obstacles, but rising quickly enough to allow landing craft to withdraw. Moonlight was required for airborne navigation, but not so bright that it exposed planes to German fighters. Naval gunfire needed visibility. Infantry needed manageable surf. Engineers needed time to clear exits before reinforcements arrived. None of these conditions could be adjusted once the operation began. And all of them depended on the weather. By early June 1944, Allied meteorologists were tracking a powerful Atlantic storm system moving toward the English Channel. On June 3rd and 4th, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Winds increased. Waves grew violent. Cloud ceilings dropped. Rain swept across southern England and northern France. June 5th had been the original invasion date. By the morning of June 4th, it was clear that launching under those conditions would be extremely dangerous. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, now faced a decision that no amount of planning could make easier. If he delayed the invasion, he risked exposing the massive buildup to German intelligence. German reconnaissance flights might detect the Armada. Spies and informants could piece together what deception had hidden. Hitler's forces could reinforce Normandy or reposition armored divisions. If Eisenhower went forward and failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. An entire generation of Allied soldiers could be lost in a single day. The Western Allies might not be able to mount another cross-channel invasion for months or years. The Soviet Union, already suffering millions of casualties on the Eastern Front, would remain alone against the bulk of German ground forces. Political pressure inside Britain and the United States could fracture the Allied coalition. The war might drag on indefinitely. There was no scenario without risk. On June 4th, Eisenhower gathered his senior commanders at Southwick House. The atmosphere was tense and exhausted. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery argued that delay would only worsen the situation. Admiral Bertram Ramsay worried about the fleet in rough seas. Air Marshal Trafford Leigh-Mallory warned that airborne divisions could be decimated if dropped in poor weather. General Omar Bradley listened, weighing probabilities no one could truly calculate. Then the meteorologists spoke. The key figure was Group Captain James Stagg, a quiet Scottish officer tasked with synthesizing forecasts from multiple Allied teams, British, American, and Canadian. Their predictions did not fully agree. Some models suggested continued storms. Others hinted at a brief break. Stagg reported that a narrow window might open late on June 5th and extend into June 6th. Winds would ease slightly. Clouds might lift intermittently. Seas would remain rough but potentially navigable. It was not a favorable forecast. It was merely acceptable. Eisenhower made the first delay decision, pushing the invasion from June 5th to June 6th, pending a final update. That order rippled outward across England. Ships already at sea were recalled. Troops were told to wait. No explanation was given. That night, the storm intensified. Many commanders assumed the invasion would be postponed again. In the early hours of June 5th, Eisenhower received the final weather briefing. Stagg reported that the window still existed. It was fragile and dangerous, but it was real. If they did not take it, the next viable combination of tides and moonlight would not occur for weeks. Eisenhower understood what that meant. Waiting could mean losing surprise. Waiting could mean strengthening German defenses. Waiting could mean prolonging the war. After a long silence, Eisenhower spoke. "Okay, let's go." With that decision, history moved forward. Orders were transmitted across England. Naval task forces received clearance to sail. Airborne units were alerted. Engineers, medics, and infantry prepared to move. The largest invasion force ever assembled began to mobilize, quietly, urgently, and without ceremony. As June 5th turned into June 6th, Eisenhower visited troops of the 101st Airborne Division. He smiled. He joked. He wished them luck. Many of the men he spoke to would be dead within hours. Eisenhower knew this. They did not. Later, alone, Eisenhower wrote a brief note. It was not a message of confidence. It was an admission of responsibility. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. He folded the paper and placed it in his pocket. He expected to need it. As the order to proceed spread across England, the invasion shifted from theory to motion. There was no dramatic announcement, no speech broadcast to the troops. Most men learned what was happening simply because engines started, trucks began to roll, and officers stopped saying, "Wait." Along the southern coast, ports that had been quiet for days suddenly came alive. Landing craft slipped into the water under cover of darkness. Destroyers and cruisers formed up offshore. Battleships moved into position, their massive guns silent but ready. Thousands of ships began to move almost simultaneously, converging toward a single stretch of enemy coastline. The scale of the movement was unprecedented. More than 5,000 vessels, warships, transports, landing craft, support ships, filled the channel. From the air, the sea below looked solid, as if one could walk across it. Yet for the men inside those ships, the journey felt claustrophobic and uncertain. Many had been told only fragments of the plan. Some knew the names of the beaches, others did not. Few knew exactly what awaited them. Seasickness spread quickly as waves battered the smaller craft. Soldiers vomited into helmets or over the sides. The smell of fuel, oil, and fear mixed in the cold air. Some men prayed, others went quiet. A few tried to joke, but the jokes rarely lasted. Time slowed. Above the fleet, the air war began before most soldiers even realized it. Shortly after midnight, hundreds of transport planes lifted off from English airfields. Inside them, paratroopers stood packed together, weighed down by weapons, ammunition, radios, and explosives. Many carried more than their own body weight in gear. They were going first. Their mission was critical. Secure bridges, block roads, disrupt German reinforcements, and create confusion behind enemy lines. They were meant to prepare the way for the landings. If they failed, The men on the beaches would face organized counterattacks before they could establish a foothold. The weather made everything harder. Clouds swallowed entire formations. Pilots struggled to maintain course. Anti-aircraft fire erupted as German defenses responded to the sound of engines. Tracer rounds tore through the darkness. Drop zones were missed. Paratroopers jumped anyway. Some landed near their objectives. Many did not. Some landed in flooded fields and drowned under the weight of their equipment. Others landed alone, miles from friendly units, forced to improvise with whoever they could find. Small groups formed and reformed in the dark, attacking targets they believed mattered because waiting for perfect information meant doing nothing. German command was immediately confused. Reports flooded in from across Normandy. Parachutes spotted, gunfire heard, bridges attacked. But the reports did not form a clear picture. Was this the main invasion? A raid? Another deception? Hitler, asleep at his headquarters, was not awakened immediately. His generals hesitated to commit armored reserves without certainty. The deception campaign, months in the making, was still working. While confusion spread inland, the invasion fleet drew closer to shore. By the early hours of June 6th, the coastline of Normandy emerged through the mist. It did not look like history. It looked like a hostile, unfamiliar shore. Cliffs, dunes, dark shapes where gun emplacements waited. Naval guns opened fire. The bombardment was overwhelming. Battleships unleashed shells weighing more than a ton. Cruisers and destroyers added their fire. The sound was constant, thunder without pause. Entire sections of coastline vanished behind smoke and debris. For a brief moment, many soldiers believed nothing could survive it. They were wrong. As landing craft approached the beaches, German defenses began to fire back. Machine guns, artillery, mortars. At Omaha Beach, the naval bombardment had failed to destroy many fortified positions. When the ramps dropped, American soldiers were cut down almost immediately. Units were pinned to the sand. Officers were killed. Communications collapsed. For a time, Omaha looked like a disaster. Men drowned under the weight of their gear. Medics worked under fire. Engineers struggled to clear obstacles while shells exploded around them. Progress was measured in yards, then in feet. Elsewhere, conditions were different. At Utah Beach, currents pushed landing craft off course, but resistance was lighter. Commanders adapted quickly, landing troops where they could advance rather than where they had planned. British and Canadian forces faced heavy fighting at Gold, Juno, and Sword, but managed to push inland despite stiff opposition. None of it was clean. None of it was smooth. But by midday, something critical had happened. The Allies had not been pushed back into the sea. The beachheads were fragile, disorganized, and under constant threat. But they existed. Men were landing faster than they were being killed. Supplies were coming ashore. Artillery was being emplaced. Air superiority limited German movement during daylight. The invasion had survived its most dangerous hours. What most of the soldiers fighting that day never knew was how close they had come to never being there at all. They did not know about the storm that almost canceled everything. They did not know about the arguments in the command room. They did not know that the man in charge had prepared a message accepting total failure. They believed the invasion was unstoppable because it was happening. In reality, it had nearly been stopped before it began. In the days that followed, the Allies expanded the beachhead. Fighting was brutal. Progress was slow. Casualties mounted. But the German army could not contain the invasion. Reinforcements were delayed. Command decisions were slow. The opportunity to crush the landings in their infancy had passed. Within weeks, Allied forces broke out of Normandy. Paris was liberated in August. Less than a year later, Nazi Germany surrendered. History would remember June 6, 1944, as D-Day, the beginning of the end. But June 5th is the day that truly mattered. The day when nothing was guaranteed. The day when uncertainty ruled. the day when history hesitated. The outcome of the war did not turn on overwhelming force alone. It turned on imperfect information, fragile forecasts, and a willingness to act despite the fear of catastrophic failure. D-Day was not inevitable. It was allowed to happen, and that raises a question that still matters. If you had been standing where Eisenhower stood, knowing that a delay might doom the war, and that action might doom an entire generation, what would you have done? Would you have waited for better conditions? Or would you have said the word that changed the world? Go!